I never thought a pizza could change my entire weekend, but here we are. So there I was, sitting alone at this tiny corner table in my favorite late night spot, this little hole-in-the-wall place that does the best pepperoni slices you've ever tasted. It was one of those nights where I just wanted to unwind after a brutal week at work, you know? Nothing fancy, just me, my phone on silent, and one last slice of pepperoni pizza. I was nursing my soda, scrolling through Instagram when this guy walks in. Not in a wow, look at that guy way, but in the kind of way where you notice him because he's clearly out of place but not awkward about it. Kind of like that one person who doesn't need to try but still turns heads. He looked tired, maybe from a long day, but there was something calm in his eyes that made him stand out in the dim light of the pizzeria. He ordered something at the counter, then scanned the room like he was looking for a place to sit. All the booths were full, except for the one next to me. It was a shared table situation, the kind where you just hope the stranger isn't weird or super chatty, because honestly, I just wanted my quiet pizza moment. Then, he looked at my table. I had one slice left on my plate, and before I could even say anything, he asked, "Hey, do you want to split that last slice?" His voice was casual, like asking for the time, but there was this strange warmth to it that caught me off guard. I blinked, because splitting a slice isn't exactly a common thing. I was about to say, "It's cool, I'll just eat it myself," but before I could even respond, he pulled out a chair and sat down right across from me. "Hope you don't mind," he said with a small smile. I didn't mind. Honestly, I was curious now. Who just asks to split a slice and then sits down at a stranger's table without even a proper intro? So I shrugged and said, "Sure, why not?" And just like that, the last slice of my pizza turned into the start of something way more interesting than I expected that night. He reached over and grabbed a piece of the slice, folding it carefully like a true New Yorker, something I admired, even though I was nowhere near as skilled. "So I'm Jake," he said between bites, wiping his mouth on the back of his hand. "Mark," I replied, a little surprised at how easily the words came out. Usually I'm the quiet type, especially with strangers, but there was something about Jake that made me feel like I could just talk without overthinking. "Long day?" I asked, curious despite myself. Jake nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "Yeah, moved here about a month ago for work. Still trying to figure out this city. And honestly, some days it's just exhausting." I nodded, relating more than I wanted to admit. Moving to a new place, starting over, it can wear you down in ways you don't expect. "So what's your story?" he asked, eyes warm, not in an invasive way, but like he genuinely wanted to know. I hesitated for a second, then shrugged. "I work in marketing. Nothing glamorous. I guess I'm just one of those people who ends up working late a lot. Pizza at 11 p.m. is basically my comfort food." Jake laughed. "Marketing, huh? I'm in tech, software development. Definitely not glamorous either, but I'm learning to enjoy the chaos." We fell into an easy rhythm of conversation, the kind where you don't feel like you have to impress or hide anything. I found myself telling him about my favorite spots in the city, the dumb things I'd done trying to get used to the subway, even the awkward date I'd had earlier that week that went nowhere. Jake shared some of his own stories, how he'd moved from a small town in Ohio, how the city was both thrilling and terrifying, and how sometimes it felt like he was just waiting for something real to happen. It felt surprisingly nice to connect like this, two strangers sharing slices and stories in a little pizzeria. At some point, I realized the slice we split was gone. The waiter came by, and Jake ordered a second soda. Then he looked at me, almost sheepishly. "Mind if I stay a bit? I'm not really ready to head home yet." I shrugged again, feeling a little thrill I wasn't expecting. "Sure, have a seat." We moved our chairs closer, the dim light casting soft shadows across the table. The place was quieter now, most of the late-night crowd drifting away. Jake's smile was easy, but there was this flicker in his eyes when he looked at me, like he was considering something, or maybe hoping for something. So, he said, "What do you usually do on weekends?" I felt a little awkward but honest. "Honestly, nothing special. I binge watch shows or hang out with friends when I can. Sometimes I just walk around the city, try to find new coffee shops." He nodded. "Sounds nice. I've been meaning to explore more, but it's hard when you don't really know anyone." That hit a chord. Yeah, getting to know this city is one thing. Getting to know people is a whole other thing. Jake looked down at the table, then back up with a soft smile. Maybe we could explore together sometime? I blinked. Was he serious? Maybe it was the late hour, or the unexpected connection, but I felt my heart speed up just a little. Yeah, I said. I'd like that. We talked a little longer, but I noticed the time creeping toward midnight. The staff were starting to clean up, flicking off neon signs and stacking chairs. Jake stood up and stretched. Thanks for letting me crash your pizza party, he joked. I laughed, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the soda or the little heater under the table. As he gathered his jacket, he hesitated for a moment, then said, Hey, can I get your number? I want to actually make that city exploring happen. I pulled out my phone and handed it to him. He typed quickly, then smiled like he'd just won a small victory. Mark, he said, this was a good night. Yeah, I agreed. It really was. He nodded, gave me one of those rare looks that feels more like a promise than just a goodbye, and then walked out into the chilly night. I sat there for a minute, the empty plate in front of me suddenly feeling like more than just a leftover slice. That random split pizza slice turned out to be one of the best decisions I didn't even know I wanted to make. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see where it led. The next day I woke up feeling strangely hopeful, which was a nice change from the usual Monday morning dread. My phone lit up with a message from Jake before I even got out of bed. It was simple, just, Hey Mark, pizza and city adventures soon? I smiled, rolled out of bed, and shot back. Absolutely. When are you free? We exchanged a handful of texts over the day, mostly figuring out schedules and sharing favorite spots. It turned out Jake was working crazy hours, but he was determined to carve out time for this little city exploring project we'd accidentally started. By Friday evening, we agreed to meet at a small coffee shop he'd found near his apartment. I liked that we weren't rushing into anything. No pressure, just coffee and conversation. When I got there, Jake was already waiting, seated at a table near the window, sipping an espresso with that same calm look in his eyes. Hey, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. This place is nice, right? I found it last week. Perfect for people watching and pretending you're a local. He grinned. We talked about everything and nothing, the usual getting to know you stuff, but with a comfort that surprised me. He shared stories about growing up in a tiny town, and I told him about my younger years navigating the city's art scene, trying to find my place. After a while, the conversation took a turn I didn't expect. So, Jake said, leaning back, do you ever feel like you're waiting for something? Like something real? I blinked, caught off guard by the question. Yeah, more times than I can count. Feels like there's this gap between the life I have and the life I want. Jake nodded, looking out the window at the bustling street. Same here. I moved here thinking everything would just fall into place, but it's harder than I thought. There was a pause, the kind that feels heavy but not uncomfortable. Then Jake reached across the table and brushed a stray hair from my forehead. It was such a small gesture, but it hit me like a lightning bolt. I'm glad I asked to split that slice, he said softly. I caught his gaze and saw everything I was feeling reflected back. Hope, nervousness, possibility. Me too, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. From that moment, things started to shift between us. We weren't just two guys sharing pizza or coffee. We became something more, something fragile and exciting all at once. Over the next few weeks, we explored the city together like we'd planned. We wandered through parks, tried out quirky food trucks, and even got lost in a maze of side streets one rainy afternoon. Jake showed me his favorite bookstores, and I dragged him to all my old haunts. It felt like we were slowly building our own little world within the chaos of the city. One night, after a long walk by the river, we found ourselves sitting on a bench, watching the city lights shimmer in the water. I never thought I'd find this here, Jake said, his voice low. Me neither, I admitted. It's funny how a simple slice of pizza brought us here. He smiled, his hand finding mine in the dark. I'm glad it did. That night, as we walked back to the subway, I realized something important. Sometimes, the moments that seem small or random, like sharing a piece of pizza, are actually the ones that change everything. And with Jake by my side, I was ready to see where this unexpected story would take us next. The weeks after that night by the river felt like a blur of moments that somehow all added up to something real. We kept falling into this easy rhythm. Texts over lunch breaks, weekend plans that always ended up longer and better than either of us expected, and those quiet weekday nights when we'd just call to hear each other's voices after a long day. One Thursday, Jake invited me over to his apartment. I'd been there once before, but that night felt different. The air had this charged quietness, like both of us knew something was shifting, but weren't quite ready to say it aloud yet. He was making tea when I arrived, fumbling with the kettle like it was some kind of puzzle. I laughed, the familiar warmth bubbling up between us. Having trouble? I teased, sliding my arms around his waist from behind. He jumped just a little, then smiled that easy smile I'd come to know so well. You caught me. I'm useless with appliances. We settled onto his couch, cups in hand, and spent the next hour talking about everything, from childhood memories to our fears about the future. Then, without warning, Jake reached over and took my hand. Mark, I don't want this to be just easy and fun, he said softly. I want it to mean something. My heart did that stupid, fluttery thing I always got when I was around him. It does. I'm just scared sometimes, I guess. Scared it won't last. He sighed, rubbing his thumb over my knuckles. Yeah, me too. But I think that's part of it. It's scary because it matters. We stayed like that for a while, the silence between us full of unspoken promises and new beginnings. A few days later, Jake surprised me with tickets to a small indie concert at a local venue. The place was packed, but somehow, when we were together, the noise faded into the background. Halfway through the show, he leaned in close and whispered, I'm really glad I sat at your table that night. I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the crowded room or the music. Me too. The truth was, that random slice of pizza had brought me something I hadn't realized I was missing, a connection that felt genuine, messy, and hopeful all at once. But as with everything worth having, it wasn't without its challenges. One evening, a few weeks later, Jake and I sat across from each other at my apartment, tension thick in the air. He was fidgeting with his phone, and I was trying not to overthink every word before I said it. I got an offer at work, he finally said, looking up. It's a promotion, but it means moving to the other side of the country. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Wow, that's big. Yeah, I haven't decided yet. Part of me wants to take it, but part of me can't imagine leaving, he admitted. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. What would you want to do? He looked at me, vulnerability shining in his eyes. I want us to work. I want this to be real, but I'm scared it won't survive the distance. I reached over and took his hand. We'll figure it out. We've come this far, haven't we? He squeezed my hand, a small smile breaking through. Yeah, we have. That night, instead of letting fear take over, we made a promise to try. No matter the distance, no matter the uncertainty. Looking back, it still amazes me how a simple question over a half-eaten pizza slice turned into something so much bigger. Sometimes, life throws you a moment that feels small, but ends up changing everything, and when it does, you hold on tight, because you never know where it might lead. The weeks after that conversation slipped into a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Jake started preparing for the possibility of moving, packing up boxes, sorting through what to keep and what didn't fit into his new life on the other side of the country. Meanwhile, I was trying to keep my own feelings in check, balancing hope with the creeping fear of what it might mean for us. We tried to squeeze as much time as possible together, knowing that soon those moments would be fewer and farther between. One Saturday afternoon, we found ourselves wandering through a bustling street market, the kind that's alive with the scent of fresh bread, the chatter of vendors, and the occasional honk of a horn. I'm gonna miss this, Jake said, his voice quieter than usual as we watched a street performer juggle flaming torches. I glanced at him, feeling the weight of the unspoken words between us. Me too, I said. It wasn't just the market. It was everything. This city, the late-night pizza runs, the way he fit into my life so naturally. He stopped walking and looked at me, eyes a little glassy. I don't want this to be goodbye. Neither do I admitted. We'll make it work. We have to. But the truth is, neither of us really knew how. Over the next few days, we talked about how we'd stay connected. Video calls, weekend visits, the usual long-distance cliches. Still, I could see the hesitation every time Jake looked at me like he was trying to memorize my face. The night before his flight, we sat on my couch, the apartment feeling emptier than it ever had. I made coffee, and Jake pulled me close, resting his head on my shoulder. "Promise me something?" he asked. "Anything. Promise that no matter how far apart we are, you won't give up on us." I tightened my arm around him. "I promise." We sat like that for a long time, neither of us wanting to say goodbye. The day he left was surreal. Standing at the airport, watching him walk through the gate, I felt this strange mix of pride, hope, and heartbreak all rolled into one. I told myself this wasn't the end, that it was just the beginning of a new chapter, and for a while, it was. Our messages and calls kept us close, filling the empty spaces with laughter and plans for future visits. But distance is tricky. It's not just the miles, it's the missed breakfasts, the forgotten stories, the subtle changes you only notice when you're together. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself scrolling through our old texts, those first messages about splitting a pizza slice, the silly jokes, the late-night confessions. A pang of loneliness hit me harder than I expected. Just then, my phone buzzed. "Jake, can we talk?" the message read. I didn't hesitate. "Yeah, what's up?" When we connected on video, his face looked tired but determined. "I miss you," he said bluntly, "and I think I've been avoiding saying something. I'm not sure this distance is working for me." My stomach dropped. "Me neither," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "What do we do?" I swallowed hard. I don't want to lose what we have, but I don't know if we can keep doing this like this. For a moment, silence. Then Jake's voice, softer than before. "What if I move back? What if I try to make this work? Really work?" The idea hit me like a wave. It was scary, unexpected, but also exactly what I wanted. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yeah, I am." We spent the next hour talking about logistics, fears, what-ifs, and hopes. It felt like a weight was lifting, replaced by a cautious excitement. A few weeks later, Jake was back. We met again at that same little pizzeria where it all started. The place hadn't changed much, and maybe that was the point. It was a constant in the chaos. He looked at me across the table, eyes shining with that same calm warmth I'd fallen for. "Ready to share more than just a slice?" he asked, grinning. I laughed, feeling a rush of relief and happiness. "Absolutely. So here we are, still figuring it out, still making mistakes, but doing it together." And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. It felt surreal, seeing Jake walk back into the pizzeria like nothing had changed, but also everything had. The little bell over the door jingled as he stepped inside, and for a moment, the whole room seemed to fade away except for him. He slid into the seat across from me, that familiar grin barely hiding the nerves I could see in his eyes. "Back in my old seat," he said, gesturing to the chair like he owned the place. "You never really left, did you?" I teased, still trying to wrap my head around the fact that he was actually here. "Guess some things are worth coming back for," he replied, folding his hands on the table. We ordered the same pepperoni slices that had started it all, the comfort of routine mixing with the buzz of something new. There was an easy silence as we ate, but it wasn't awkward. More like the kind of quiet where it feels good just to be near someone. After a while, Jake leaned forward, his voice softer. "I was scared, moving back. What if it wasn't the right choice? What if things had changed too much?" I reached across the table and caught his hand. I was scared too. But sometimes you have to take that leap. Otherwise, you never know what you're missing. He smiled, squeezing my hand gently. "Yeah, I'm glad I did." The days that followed were a whirlwind of rediscovery. Living in the same city again brought challenges we hadn't anticipated, like figuring out how to merge two routines, sharing space, learning the quirks that made us who we are. But there was something exhilarating about building something new out of what we'd already started. One evening, we found ourselves curled up on my couch, a movie playing softly in the background. Jake rested his head on my chest, and I could feel his steady breath against my skin. It was one of those moments where everything else just fell away. I never thought I'd find this, he murmured, looking up at me. Find what? I asked. This. Us. I guess I always thought love was this messy, complicated thing. But with you, it feels right. I smiled, brushing a hand through his hair. It's messy sometimes, but yeah, it feels pretty damn good. Life wasn't perfect. We had disagreements. A missed call here, a forgotten plan there. But we learned to talk through the hard stuff instead of letting it fester. And slowly the trust between us deepened. A few months in, Jake invited me to meet his family. That was a big deal for both of us. Introductions like that aren't easy, especially when you're from different worlds. But his mom was warm and welcoming, his younger sister curious but kind. Seeing Jake with them gave me a glimpse into parts of his life I hadn't known before, and it made me feel lucky to be included. On the flip side, he came to a gallery opening for a project I'd been working on, standing quietly by my side as I nervously explained my work to strangers. His support was quiet but steady, and I realized that having someone who believed in you made all the difference. One night, as we sat on the fire escape, sharing a bottle of cheap wine and looking out over the city skyline, Jake turned to me with that serious look he gets when he's about to say something important. "Mark, there's something I've been thinking about," he said, tracing a circle on my knee. I held my breath, heart pounding. I don't want to just be us here in the city. I want to build a life. Together. I swallowed hard, emotions churning. I want that too. He smiled, relief washing over his face. Good. Because I was starting to think I might be crazy for hoping. Nah, I said, laughing softly. Crazy is just a word for people who try. We sat there for a while longer, dreaming out loud about what the future might hold. Maybe a place of our own. A dog. Sunday mornings. With coffee and terrible pancakes. Looking back, it's wild how a simple slice of pizza, a moment so small and unplanned, could kickstart something that changed my life. Sometimes, the most unexpected things bring the biggest surprises. And as for Jake and me, we're just getting started. After that night on the fire escape, everything felt like it was moving forward, but in a way that wasn't rushed. Jake and I found a balance between our individual lives and the new life we were building together. It wasn't always perfect. There were moments when work would pile up, or when we'd get on each other's nerves over dumb stuff like leaving the dishes in the sink or who forgot to take out the trash. But even those annoyances felt manageable because we had this foundation to fall back on. One Saturday morning, we decided to tackle an epic brunch at my place. Neither of us was exactly a master chef, but we had a pile of groceries and a stubborn determination to make something edible. Jake was in charge of the eggs, and I handled the coffee, which, for me, was a sacred ritual. He cracked the eggs with surprising skill, and I teased him about how domestic he was acting. Hey, I'm full of surprises. He shot back with a grin. We ended up with something that looked more like scrambled chaos than Eggs Benedict, but it tasted pretty damn good to us. Sitting side by side at the tiny kitchen table, eating off mismatched plates, I felt this quiet happiness that settled deep in my chest. Later that day, we went for a walk in the park nearby. The trees were just starting to turn colors, and the crisp fall air had that perfect mix of coolness and sun. We found a bench overlooking the pond and sat down, watching a group of kids chasing ducks. Do you remember that night when you asked if I wanted to split the last slice? Jake asked, his voice soft. How could I forget? I replied, smiling at the memory. That slice changed everything. He laughed, then reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. I was so nervous sitting down at your table. I didn't know if you'd think I was weird. Honestly, I thought you were kind of bold, I admitted, but I'm glad you were. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying the moment. A few weeks later, Jake and I decided it was time to move in together. It felt like the right step after months of renting separate apartments and shuttling between our places whenever we could. Hunting for a new place was surprisingly fun. We joked about what kind of couch would survive our movie marathons and debated over kitchen layouts like grown-ups. When we finally found a small but cozy apartment with a decent view of the city skyline, signing the lease together felt like a milestone. It was official. We were building something that went beyond late-night pizza and coffee dates. Moving day was chaotic but filled with laughter. Boxes everywhere, furniture that didn't quite fit where we thought it would, and a playlist of our favorite songs keeping us going. At one point, Jake tried to assemble a bookshelf and ended up with extra screws and more confusion than success. I told him he was banned from DIY projects, but his grin told me he was already planning the next attempt. That night, after everything was mostly unpacked, we cooked dinner together in our tiny kitchen. The apartment smelled like garlic and basil, and the soft hum of the city filtered in through the open window. Sitting across from each other at our little dining table, Jake reached across and took my hand. "I never thought I'd find someone I could be this comfortable with," he said, his eyes bright. "Me neither," I admitted. There was something about being there with him in our shared space that made everything feel real in a way it hadn't before. This wasn't just a fling or a convenience, it was home. But life, being life, threw us a curveball not long after. Jake got a call from his old company, the one he'd left when he moved here. They wanted him to come back, offering a role that sounded like a big step up. The catch? It was in another state, a few hours away by plane. We spent long nights talking about what this meant, weighing the pros and cons. Part of me wanted to encourage him to take it. The opportunity was huge, but the idea of being apart again brought back all those old fears. "Maybe we can do the distance thing again," Jake suggested one night, his voice heavy. I shook my head, frustration bubbling up. "Jake, I don't want to go through that again. We barely survived the last time." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I know, but this is important to me." We didn't have an easy answer. We both needed things: career growth, stability, connection. It felt like the universe was testing us again, seeing how much we were willing to fight for this. In the end, we made a choice. Jake negotiated a remote work arrangement, at least for a while, to stay here. It wasn't perfect, but it was a compromise, a way to keep building what we had without tearing us apart. That decision felt like a victory, small but meaningful. Looking back, I realized that relationships aren't about flawless moments or smooth sailing. They're about choices, big and small, that show how much you're willing to invest, to stumble through uncertainty, and to keep coming back to each other. And for now, that's exactly what Jake and I are doing. Sharing slices of pizza, messy mornings, and the kind of love that's worth every twist and turn. Months passed, and with each one, Jake and I grew more comfortable in the life we were carving out together. The remote work arrangement wasn't perfect. There were still late nights, missed calls, and moments when the stress of juggling everything felt overwhelming. But we handled it. We talked more, checked in often, and learned to lean on each other in new ways. It wasn't always easy, but it felt real. One quiet Sunday morning, we found ourselves back in our apartment kitchen, the place where so many little moments had taken shape. I was making coffee while Jake worked on some project at the kitchen table, headphones on, focused. I watched him for a moment, feeling a swell of gratitude for this man who had become my partner through all the unpredictability. When he finally looked up, catching my gaze, there was that familiar softness in his eyes. He smiled, a little shy but full of meaning. "You know," he said, setting his work aside, "I was thinking about that night when I first asked to split that last slice of pizza." I grinned. "How could you forget?" He laughed quietly. "Yeah, well, I was nervous as hell back then. I didn't know if you'd even want to talk to me. But I'm glad I did." "Me too," I said, coming around the table to sit beside him. He reached for my hand, and this time there was no hesitation between us. Just a quiet, steady connection that had been years in the making. "I don't know what the future will bring, Jake. But I do know that whatever it is, I want to face it with you," I said. He squeezed my hand gently. "I feel the same. No matter where life takes us, us, it's worth fighting for." There was no grand gesture, no dramatic declarations. Just two people, sitting side by side, content and the shared understanding that they'd found something rare and precious. And maybe that's what love is, the sum of everyday choices, the quiet moments when you choose each other again and again, even when it's messy or uncertain. That night, as we settled in on the couch, the city lights glowing softly outside our window, I felt a deep sense of peace, the kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, all because of a simple question over a slice of pizza. Sometimes, life's best stories start with the smallest moments. And this one, ours, was just beginning.